Really excited this afternoon to have a conversation and discussion around school to work transitions. Just in terms of the format, we have 3 presenters this afternoon. Each presenter will get 10 minutes. And Tammy, we will, I will give you cues through me in terms of when you're down. We're asking presenters just to give a couple of minute introduction of themselves, and then we'll kind of proceed from there. We do have questions later, and if you're interested in participating in Slido, again, please slido.com/DWC. Ask questions in there. We've already got our first poll active, so please feel free to kind of scope it out. So it's my pleasure to introduce Tammy King, right? Strong. Tammy Strong. I don't have a bio. I'm sorry. Tammy Strong. Sorry about that, Tammy.
So everyone, I tried my best to be in Ottawa. Unfortunately, the weather foiled me. So I am still in Fredericton, but I am happy to welcome you all to my kitchen. I've never done a presentation from my kitchen before, so this is a new experience. Now, in the Maritimes, we have kitchen parties, so if you were all here, we could enjoy ourselves.
People are commenting on your cupboards, Tammy. Nice cupboards, they're saying.
And I have seafood chowder, not to reinforce maritime stereotypes, but I have seafood chowder brewing on the stove. So my name is Tammy Strong. I work for the Ministry of Education here in Fredericton, Brunswick, and in a few moments I'll share with you some of the work we've been doing around a universal design for learning approach to transitioning marginalized youth, including, of course, those with disabilities. All right, so I guess I'll get started and let you know that about 2 years ago, we started to go down the road to redesigning our career development programming here in New Brunswick. And specifically, because we in New Brunswick are known for inclusive education, and specifically a broad swath of inclusive education. So what I will say is when we started, you know, I was reading the Pan-Canadian strategy that was prepared in advance of the conference. And one of the things that struck me was the intersectional nature. And I really love that concept, and that's certainly how we function here in New Brunswick. So we don't look at folks, you know, by one axis. So folks with disabilities, folks who are members of the LGBTQ I2S community, folks who are newcomers, folks who are Indigenous, and of course you could be all of those things all at once. And so we really built our programming thinking about the intersectional nature of our students, our children and students. We based our program structure on the Universal Design for Learning format, which I'm sure many of you are very familiar with the UDL format, but if you are not, it's based on an architectural concept that was developed by Ronald Mace. And Ronald Mace was an interesting fellow because he looked at structures and buildings and thought, how can we open this up for everyone to take advantage, not just folks without disabilities? And that is precisely exactly the way we wanted to develop our transition programs. We never wanted to build a structure and then say, oh, now we need a ramp for this particular group or that particular group. And specifically, here in New Brunswick, we have a higher rate of disability than anywhere else in Canada. So it was exceedingly important to us that we were not going to build a structure that would exclude our students with disabilities. One of the taglines for Universal Design for Learning is, what's essential for some is good for all. So I'll just draw your attention to things like when you go to the grocery store and the doors open automatically, you know, essential for some folks who may have some mobility concerns, but also really great if you're pushing a stroller or carrying groceries or holding the hands of children. Those are all really a good thing. And similarly, if you think about things like subtitles when you're watching television, absolutely essential for folks who are deaf or hard of hearing, but also great if you're an insomniac and your partner is sleeping soundly, or you're running on the treadmill and you can't hear what's happening. So this idea of essential for some and good for all is really important to us here in New Brunswick. So again, we built our programming thinking about a wide swath of learners, and we used the basic cognitive neuroscience. And what I mean by that is that we provide very rich supports. We also reduce as many barriers as we can. And then the third thing I think that's really key is that we ensure that our standards remain very high. None of this will work if we say, well, that's good enough. That is good enough. That it's never good enough. We have to maintain very high standards. So the first thing we did, we hired 2 individuals to begin work, 2 extraordinary folks, and we looked at the literature. We wanted to know what does the research say is best. And so we looked at things like social emotional learning. And social emotional learning is just really what we used to refer to as soft skills. All of those things like being able to build really strong relationships, being able to engage in good decision making, social awareness, self-awareness, self-management, all of those things that had really started, at least in our province, to fall by the wayside. We ensured that those were put back front and center, because those are skills that folks need, whether you're in the world of work, whether you're engaging in post-secondary, any of those things on your way to transitioning. The second thing that we recognized was the piece around experiential learning. If you look to Finland, and in education we always look to Finland because they're amazing, one of the things that they started to do was in the middle school, starting in the 6th grade, they started to, here in Canada, we wait till the 9th grade, and then we do take our kids to work, and maybe if you're lucky, you do a co-op, but not all students do that. And so we have started, beginning this year, it will begin in February, all of our middle schools will begin engaging in experiential workplace opportunities. And that's really important on a number of levels. First of all, students get out and get to determine, do I like this? Do I not like this? Does this put my skills to work? Does it not? Does it make my heart sing? Does it not? That's important. But equally important, it was really funny because as I was reading your report, I was like, yes, because you folks were talking about in your Pan-Canadian strategy, you were talking about this idea of employers becoming disability confident. And that strikes me as being really important. So having students with disabilities in your workplace who can perform really well and be really impressive. Those are ways that you can make your workplace not only disability confident but inclusive. So we're excited about that, especially because CERIC has just released a study last week, and when they looked at all of the marginalized groups of folks in terms of in the workplace, who was most marginalized, and it was really clear it was folks with disabilities. And what they said was they were discriminated against at a rate of 41%, which was higher than newcomers, Indigenous, LGBTQ, women, and so on and so forth. So imagine being an intersectional person and having a number of those things. That was really important.
Tammy, you have 2 minutes.
Okay, great. I just want to also mention that we're really working hard on labor market information as well. We've partnered with our Department of Post-Secondary Education, Training and Labor. And what we found is that the folks who work at the Department of Post-Sec, like the economists and so on, they understand that whole piece around the economy. And here in New Brunswick, we are in an interesting place because we've got a lot of outward migration of young people, and so much so, and we've got an elderly population. So what we have decided, we know that teachers are huge career influencers, and what we needed was this information about the fact that there are so many opportunities here in New Brunswick. We needed students not to be leaving. We need them to stay because we're going to have about 110,000 jobs open up due to retirement and attrition in the next 5 years. And that's significant. And even with the Atlantic immigration pilot, we will not be able to bring all of these people in. So we have partnered with the Department of Post-Secondary Education, Training, and Labor, and of course they're coming in to give presentations to our students, but more importantly, our career influencers, our teachers, are learning this information, and we're also providing information to our #1 career influencer, which is the family. So I'll leave it there. I have about a bazillion more things I can tell you, but I'll wait for you to ask me questions.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Tammy.
Well, hello. Thanks for having me. This is great. Tammy, I love the focus on universal design. I'll be touching on that a lot for higher education. So I'll speak from the perspective of higher education. I work at Carleton University. My background is all about higher education. Where do I start? I am director of what's called the READ Initiative, Research, Education, Accessibility, and Design at Carleton University. So I'll give a little bit of a background about READ and then speak to a very specific project on employability of post-secondary students with disabilities. In terms of my professional training, it's in educational psychology, specifically focusing on accessibility in higher education learning environments, including universal design, absolutely. I also have some practice on the side in psychoeducational assessments, and particularly my interest is in non-visible disabilities, mental health, learning disabilities, and so on. Again, in the context of higher education. So in higher education, we tend to operate in silos. I know that many of you can relate to that kind of a system wherever you are. There are specialized offices. You may be familiar in post-secondary. There are disability service offices that serve students with disabilities. Then you have other offices that serve other students. You have career service offices that traditionally serve the quote-unquote the general population, the traditional student, and so on. Over the years, we have realized that that does not work for accessibility to move things forward. I spent many years in disability services, which tend to focus on the bottom line, accommodations, and so on. But we saw many systemic issues in terms of accessibility when it comes to the design of learning environments in higher education. We also saw the need to engage stakeholders outside of our higher education silo. And this is why we set up READ, Research, Education, Accessibility, and Design, to essentially elevate accessibility beyond and across, beyond silos and across disciplines, across sectors, and so on. It's been going really well, and I'll tell you a little bit later. I hope I will have a chance to talk about the Canadian Accessibility Network as well. So one of the issues, there are so many issues, obviously we can touch on, obviously is the employment of persons with disabilities, and in our context, post-secondary students with disabilities. If you're familiar with the Stats Canada surveys, you know that post-secondary students do have a bit of a higher rate of employment compared to those without university or college degrees, but there's still a gap. There's still a gap between your university graduate who has a disability and the university graduate who does not have a disability. So we finally, when we had this initiative that could actually ask these questions and not be just wrapped up in the daily business, we asked why. We actually looked at our graduates, and we found out that, again, I'll speak to Carleton University, students with disabilities actually graduate on par with all students. So it just didn't add up. Why aren't our students with disabilities getting jobs at the same rate as all other students graduating from the same institution? We're talking about same programs. These are students who are as qualified as any other students coming out of Carleton University. Of course, we can have a discussion about how qualified any university student is for employment, but that's a very different panel, right? What's the value of university degree now in employment? It's a whole other thing, but still, there's that gap. Why? Why is there a gap? So we started by doing an environmental scan across the country, and a few things came up. Obviously, we focus on the post-secondary environment. One major thing that came up is there was a gap in service. So you have your disability service office, then you have your career services office. A student with a disability goes to disability services office and talks about disability-related needs and so on. The disability services office responds by setting up academic accommodations based on those disability-related needs. The same student goes to career services and they talk about resume and all that stuff. But if the student brings up an issue of self-disclosure in the workplace, they say go to the disability services office. They go to the disability services office. They can talk about self-disclosure, self-advocacy in the context of higher education. As soon as the student talks about what about at a job interview, go to the career services office. They go there, they say go back to disability services office. Eventually the student just gives up because students are very, very busy people. So they fall through the cracks, and there was definitely a gap in services and service delivery. That was one thing we identified. The other thing was outside of university environment. And these are the kind of things you are probably more familiar with in terms of employers and employer readiness to give jobs to graduates with disabilities coming out of universities. There are certain things that we from higher education feel we can actually contribute to that conversation that goes beyond the business case and all that stuff, because these are students that we work with for 4, 5, 6 years. So we have a lot of experience in terms of how best to help these students realize their true potential. This is why we set up what ended up being called the David C. Only initiative. David Only, a patron of READ and a big champion for employment of persons with disabilities. That's how it started with an idea. And we set up this 2-year initiative. We are now coming, this is our 2nd year, coming to the end in May next year. What we will come out of this initiative with will be a model. We're calling it EPF, and it's essentially a set of functions, service functions, that have to be addressed in post-secondary in order to help a student become employable. So this is how we are capturing those things that in the past have been missed, right? And we are not, the emphasis on functions is deliberate, because we don't want to talk about a position, we don't want to talk about a new office in post-secondary institutions. We're focusing on very specific service functions. So we're talking about self-disclosure, we're talking about self-advocacy, and of course we're talking about soft skills, we're talking about those kind of career, everyday things like resume development and so on. We talk about interview skills, but again in the context of disabilities, because interviews for some students with disabilities are just not the best way to get at their skills and at their potential. So with the David C. Only, how am I with time? I didn't look at my clock when I started.
How much time? 2 minutes.
Totally, 2 minutes. Okay, so 10 seconds. Then I'm okay. In that case. So with the David C. Only, we didn't just focus on the post-secondary environment. So this model that we will then transfer across the province obviously will be very useful for post-secondary institutions. And when I say useful, I mean it, because this is not only a Carleton University initiative. We, in fact, have partnered with the University of Ottawa, with Algonquin College and La Cité College. So this is an initiative of 4 major post-secondary institutions in Ottawa. We are doing some feasibility studies as well, because Ottawa is, well, shall we say Ottawa is not Toronto. So we need to figure out if what works here can work in other jurisdictions as well. So there is going to be that value for post-secondary institutions primarily, but then we also focused on the world outside post-secondary institutions. I'll just highlight one thing, because I'm probably 10 seconds from the end. We started a campaign, 1 minute, excellent. It's called Able To, and it's a fantastic campaign, I think. I'm biased, but hey. able to is about yes, you can, and we are targeting employers with this. Check it out, able2.ca, because as you know, in spite of many organizations that are ready, and they have whole departments for diversity and inclusion, there is still stigma, there is still lack of knowledge. So this campaign is about addressing some of the myths that we still see out there. We started with employers, but we are now focusing the campaign on post-secondary students with disabilities because, let's face it, and we don't talk about this as much, many students and persons with disabilities actually are not ready for employment. And we see that in post-secondary. So it's not just about the employer side, it's also about the candidate side. So with the whole focus on student services, we are really emphasizing the importance of developing employability skills of post-secondary students with disabilities. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Boris. I'd like to introduce you to Arif. Go ahead.
Hi, everyone. My name is Arif Jetha, and I'm a scientist at the Institute for Work and Health and an assistant professor at the School of Public Health at the University of Toronto. So I do a lot of research on the school-to-work transition, especially with regards to people living with episodic and invisible health conditions. And so my role on this research is to, on this panel, is to look at how the school-to-work transition is experienced at more of a macro level. So my goal is to provide some evidence and some research to help supplement the previous two presentations. So I'm going to focus on kind of two key points. The first is the state of the evidence, and the second is the school-to-work transition within the future of work. So let's just backtrack based on some of the research that was, or some of the discussions that were just had. The first was that the school-to-work transition, as we know, is a complex period, and I think what's important here is that it borders on educational, workplace, health, as well as personal domains of life. They all play a significant role in one's success in the transition into the labor market. So in an ideal scenario, a person will exit education with the skills and training necessary to succeed, so very similar to what Boris talked about in his discussion. They'll enter work, but enter work in competitive employment where they have access to wages and career opportunities that match their peers. And they have the opportunities and ability to succeed. And this means growing within their career, not just being stagnant and staying in one place. But as we know from our own personal experiences, the career trajectory can wind and take us in different directions, and clearly that's the same for someone with a disability, and they face new and emerging challenges that might compound the winding road that is one's career development. And the data helps support that. So as Boris mentioned, the Canadian Survey on Disability provides some really interesting statistics with regards to the employment of people with disabilities, and it focuses on youth and young people. So what the data suggests is that young people, especially those with severe disabilities, are more likely to report not participating in the labor market when compared to their peers without a disability. What we also see in the Canadian Survey on Disability is that approximately 110,000 Canadian youth who have disabilities report not being in education, employment, or in any sort of training roles. And this is a term that we call NEET, which tends to be a measure of economic exclusion. But what's interesting about the data that was highlighted from Statistics Canada is that about 75% of those NEET youth, so those who are excluded, report being able and wanting to enter the labor market. So what's, I think, important to highlight is a lot of the data that exists right now provides a very brief snapshot into some key challenges that people face at different stages of their school-to-work transition. But what's not captured is career advancement, access to accommodations, career satisfaction, the ability to access job skills and training within the labor market. And so one of the questions we've started to ask ourselves is, what's the best way to support young people with disabling health conditions as they go through this complex period of their lives. And so this year, we published a systematic review of literature which aimed at examining evidence-based practices with regards to supporting young people with disabling health conditions within the labor market. And what we wanted to understand is what are the evidence-based policies and programs that exist that would be beneficial to supporting people in terms of preparing, entering, and advancing within the labor market. What we also wanted to know in the systematic review was that are there interventions that differ for different young people living with different types of health conditions? Do they differ according to their gender? Do they differ according to their sex? Do they to their socioeconomic status? And as you can imagine, what we found was that there's very few evidence-based interventions that currently exist which support the school-to-work transition of young people with disabling health conditions. That's not to say that there's not really great programs that exist in the field that are doing really good work in supporting and placing people within the labor market. But in terms of evidence-based practice, there's not much there. What we did identify was that the interventions that were most effective were supported employment interventions, so those that provide placement, coaching, and training. Another interesting knowledge gap that we identified in our systematic review was that there was actually little nuance across disability types. So it was unclear what interventions would work best for what young person at what stage of their school-to-work transition. And again, I just want to note that this is peer-reviewed, evidence-based practice literature that we looked at, and so it doesn't do justice to the wealth of knowledge that exists out in the field. But I think it just goes to show that there really is a lack of understanding in terms of innovative best practice in terms of supporting the school-to-work transition. And so why is this important? Well, I think for me, what's particularly important and one that I think I really want to highlight to everyone in this room is that we know that the labor market is changing at a rapid rate. And with those rapid changes, we require innovative policies and programs that will support young people through these labor market changes. And so an abundance of Canadian labor market research points to significant disruptions to all industries, and these are related to social, economic, technological, as well as political changes. Together, they are all changing the way we work and the working conditions that are faced by young people as they transition into the labor market. They're creating new ways of working. So for instance, recent statistics indicate that about 700,000 Canadians are working in the gig economy. To what extent are young people with disabilities working in the gig economy, and what opportunities or challenges are they facing as a result of this new work exposure? Also, what's interesting to note is that there's some estimates that suggest that by 2031, Canada will face a labor shortage of 2 million workers, and this will be in all industries. Again, the question that I ask is, what role will young people with disabilities play in this changing labor market context? And to what extent will they be able to fill labor market shortages that exist? And to me, this highlights a potential opportunity for young people as they transition into the labor market. And an example of this is a recent report from the World Economic Forum. And in this recent report, the World Economic Forum surveyed 313 employers representing about 15 million workers. And what their goal was to highlight the types of job skills that will be required in the future. And what they noted was that employers most demanded job skills that included critical thinking, emotional intelligence, problem solving, as well as design and technology. And these were the types of skills that will be required in the next decade or so. What was decreasing in terms of job skills demand included the requirement for manual dexterity, the ability to memorize, clerical or service types of job skills. And I guess from this literature that's emerging on the future of work, there's a key point, and that is that the future of work represents both an opportunity that can be leveraged for young people with disabilities and not just a challenge that we should be concerned about. And so I'm going to leave the group with some questions, and these are questions that I'm actively engaging with in my research. The first is, how do we enhance existing evidence-based interventions so that young people with disabilities are getting the skills they need to thrive in the future of work? How can we maximize the strengths and address the limitations, especially with regards to the changing nature of work and the requirement for changing job skills? And to me, There needs to be a multi-sectoral approach within the context of the school-to-work transition. So we need adequate training within educational systems so that young people have the skills to thrive at work. We need employer-led interventions to upskill individuals and to meet changing demands for individuals who are placed within employment sectors. We need to continue collaborating with employment service providers to bridge the gap between educational and employment systems in ways that meet the demands of the future of work. And finally, we need researchers to continue to study the evidence-based practices that should be used to support young people with disabilities as working conditions change. So I'm going to leave you there, and I look forward to some of your comments and questions. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Arif. Okay, so we're going to throw open up the mic and start asking some questions, and we're just going to do a little bit of a shift here. Maureen is going to come up and facilitate the questions. Would encourage you to use Slido. We've already got 4 responses coming in on our poll question that Maureen will help facilitate, and also encourage you to ask questions through there as well.
Hi, everybody. First, I want to encourage you, as we're setting up this conference, and as everybody is aware, by the way, hi, Tammy. And as everybody is aware, this conference is not necessarily about just the panelists. This conference is about everybody in the room and all of the intelligence that we all bring to the conference. And so therefore, we need to hear from you, and we need to hear from you in a variety of ways. The question that we're asking you is, as the world of work changes, what are the key challenges for youth and young adults with disabilities as they transition into the workforce? And what can we do about this? And so if you are able to answer that question on Slido, if you want to just write it down and give it to one of the organizers here, that's fine too. If you want to say it out loud, that's great. We do have a mic going on the floor, but we also have questions that will come in on Slido, and I'll just go back and forth. At our last panel, it was very interesting. There were a few questions that came up that actually were best answered by the delegates in the room. So we will have a wholesome conversation about this, and so I welcome the first question. Jean? Okay.
I get the first question?
You
That's
do,
great.
Aaron.
Okay. One thing that you two guys didn't talk about, but Tammy did, is experience while at school. It's essential. Research that I did years and years ago talked about the huge difference in terms of transitioning to work from school for kids who had job-related experiences from those who don't. We talked about evidence-based research. In the United States, the IDEAS program, which has been around for a long, long time, has as an integral element training while at school. One of the areas that's been really deficient, and I know personally because I tried to get kids out of the co-op programs into my work, and I could never find a person with disability because they'd never send anybody. What are you doing to enhance the capacity of co-op programs and open the door to co-op programs and experience-based work experiences to people with disabilities, given that it makes such a huge difference in terms of eventual employability post-graduation?
Thank you.
Great question. Yeah?
Yeah.
Can I go? Oh, that's an excellent question. So part of the DWC Only initiative, the framework, we're calling it Pathways to Employment. The pathways being part-time work, being summer employment, being volunteerism, being co-op, being internships, being all those kind of things. Absolutely, it's key to our model. And we have seen a lot of success at Carleton. We actually established a position, which I don't think it's a common position in career services, that is dedicated to especially this kind of thing. We're calling it Act to Employ. So what this is about, we are helping employers bring students into employment settings. It's a bit of a subsidized approach, which we know is not the best way to go about it, but it's been working well for some students to get that experience and go into maybe the kind of employment settings that wouldn't be open through different other pathways like co-op and so on. To your question, though, what's really to me sticks out in your question is the capacity of the services like co-op to actually get students with disabilities into co-op. There are many different factors that we have identified as barriers. For example, co-op offices, you will find many will have this requirement that you're a full-time student in order to access co-op, right? Now that's a problem for many students with disabilities because they cannot maintain a full-time course load. So we have to go through this pretty specialized process where there has to be almost this permission-based kind of thing where we have to justify and co-op has to bend the rules and get the student in. It shouldn't work like that, right? That doesn't make sense. The other issue is, I'll flip it over to the student side as well. Students may gain access to co-op and start that, but have a really hard time because they are lacking some of the skills that are required to be successful in these placements. And when you connect that with the issues that employers have on their side in terms of translating the accommodations that the student is supported by in the higher education setting into the employment setting while they are students at the same time, a lot of mix-up happens there and a lot of things are missed. Our co-op offices are not, historically have been equipped to train employers to support accommodation of students with disabilities, to even understand in the context of a workplace what that means. The co-op systems are not designed to promote employability or co-op experiences for students with disabilities. We're talking systems, we're talking processes, right? I mean, from when you set up the way to apply to a position, or if you're considering how a student with a disability may navigate a program, a specific program. If you, for example, limit the co-op opportunity only to a certain year in the program, the student with a disability may actually have difficulties getting there on time, if you will. I've spoken to students who will not choose the co-op option if that's optional because it forces a very rigid structure on how they can proceed through their post-secondary studies. So there's quite a few issues that we are very mindful of and putting a lot of emphasis on work-integrated learning and that side of things. Absolutely. Good question.
Thank you.
I was just going to make a comment about some of the responses that are coming into the question on the poll.
Sure.
Because you can't see those, you can just see the questions. So one of them was, whether you have a disability or not, the number one thing that makes you successful at a job is the coworkers. They can make or break you. What is being done to educate coworkers?
So that's a great question. I'm not sure if our panelists in their school-to-work transition have that answer.
I can comment on the research more broadly, which is that when we study the labor market participation of people with disabilities, not just those young people transitioning the labor market, we know that psychosocial working conditions play a significant role in one's likelihood of sustaining productive employment. It could also be a source of support, both tangible, being able to access accommodations, adjustments at work, as well as it can be a source of emotional support. And what we've seen, especially in the return to work research, which we can now apply maybe to this area of literature, is that oftentimes when coworkers hold negative attitudes towards employees who are returning to work, those workers are less likely to report sustained return to work. And I suspect we could probably bring that data and conduct a study, and we would find similar things with a school-to-work transition. If someone's starting their first job and their coworkers are treating them poorly and they don't they don't support them in the way that a young person might require, that would probably have a significant impact on their transitional work experiences.
So that's great to know. Thank you. I will say that one of the things we get asked this question, I'm going to jump in, if you don't mind, because we do get this question asked of us at CCRW quite often by employers and businesses saying, how do I support coworkers, especially when we hire people with invisible disabilities, and the disabilities are not disclosed, because it can definitely look like a performance issue or a favoritism issue, right? That all of a sudden this worker doesn't come in Monday mornings, never's there on time. And so the other workers have to pick up the slack, and then there's some real discord between in the staff, in the team. And so we challenge the employers to take it back a few steps, and the businesses to take it back a few steps and create that disability confident setting in that workplace first, by saying that we accommodate all of our workers, not necessarily just because they have a disability, but we accommodate our workers. We value our staff, and if that statement goes out right at the beginning, that we value our staff right at the beginning by the businesses, then the coworkers, that takes away the distrust of the reason for the accommodation or the adjustment that's being made at the workplace, because the workers then realize that, sure, maybe Joe doesn't come in every Monday morning, but I also can go and watch my kids' baseball game on Wednesday afternoons. So that's quite often how we have approached that situation as well. I have a question on Slido, because it's so exciting. So the question is, how can you support students with disabilities through the standard interview process? How can students self-advocate for more accessible hiring processes? And Tammy, I don't want to forget that you're here as well. So if you want to jump in on this one or any of the questions.
One of the things that I wanted to mention to you all is that about a year and a half ago, we started going down the road of virtual reality. And in the beginning, it really sounded, Star Wars and sci-fi to me. It was like, when it was first brought up, I thought, you've got to be kidding. But what we have been able to do is to allow folks both the interview, so we've used virtual reality to do interviews and give feedback. We've used it to allow, so New Brunswick is primarily rural, and so we've been able to use it in ways that, if the experience is not readily available in your community, then you can still experience it. And the applications around folks with disabilities have also been amazing. So, again, I would not have said this to you a year and a half ago. I would have thought that it might be a little strange, but we have had incredible experiences with virtual reality, and also taping things and then being able to play them back and saying, okay, so let's take this apart and talk about how this could have gone better or whatever. So yeah, I think that that's a huge area that we can really expand on, and that can be very helpful.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other comments? Yeah? No. Okay, good. Oh, another comment, and then we have a question from the floor. Go ahead.
Okay, I'm just mindful of the nuance in this question about what can students do in terms of I guess self-advocacy and so on. One other thing that we have learned in post-secondary environment is that it really is about this developmental process. A first-year student is in a very different place than a fourth-year student in terms of their employability. What's nice about this question, so a student being competent in navigating these hiring practices, whatever we do developmentally throughout post-secondary is going to benefit this student in many different ways, including academic success. We're talking about self-insight, knowing oneself, and we're talking about communication skills in terms of self-advocacy and so on. These are truly transferable skills that will help the student self-advocate in the workplace environment, but also be really beneficial for across their academic journeys as well. So we're definitely taking this developmental lens. In fact, we are going to high schools because we believe that this development of employability of an eventual graduate begins even before they enter post-secondary.
Can I jump in? There's one other thing. I agree that self-advocacy is huge. And one of the things that we have experienced is allowing students while they're in high school to to have a post-secondary experience. And what we've been able to see, whether we facilitated things like dual credits at a local community college or at a local university, those types of things, those types of experiences, we go into it saying, absolutely, you're going to have to advocate for yourself. And we talk about human rights and what are your rights and what can you expect and what can you advocate for. And I believe absolutely that teaching the skill of self-advocacy is key in today's world.
Thank you. Before we turn the question over to the floor, we have a second question up on the Slido because our ballroom rocks. And that is, what are the ways in which educational institutions and service providers can develop the skills that young adults will require to obtain competitive and sustained employment? So again, if you want to answer those on your Slido or write them down and hand them out to us while you're thinking about that, that would be great. And we'll turn it over to Carl for his question from the floor.
So thank you for your presentation. Couple of questions. You mentioned on the post-secondary students, the gap between those with disabilities and those with non-disabilities. We're about half, about even, and gaining gainful employment. You'd mentioned that. And I was just wondering if you had if you had looked at what some of the reasons were, because we find that my own personal view is that there's fear of the stigma that's attached to that. That plays, what we find, is a huge role. And the study for the Institute for Work and Health, is that based on the Ontario, because I deal with a lot of the workers' compensation issues, the work transition programs that they have. When you talk about workers that are injured and do have a problem going back to work, facing their coworkers, because it comes down to dollars and cents for the employers, because if the worker is off work, they have to replace that worker or assign those duties to someone else. That we see as a huge problem in terms of getting people with disabilities back into the workforce.
Thank you. So it's kind of a multi-layered question there, and I think that you both know, I'm not too sure that there was a question necessarily for Tammy, but Boris, do you want to take the first part?
Sure. That's a big question, and I'm just focusing on your question. What are the reasons for this gap? So for us, the reasons, there's a set of reasons on the post-secondary side of things. There's a set of reasons on the employer sector side of things. On the post-secondary, I've already touched on some of those, so I just don't want to monopolize time here. We do have to help students build those employability skills, which, as I said, is really a developmental journey of sorts. On the employer side, you bring up stigma. You mentioned it as a stigma that's experienced by the person with a disability, I assume. There's the other side, obviously, and in terms of the employers and so on. The other side,
So
right.
just so that we've got this on the mic, so Carl's clarifying that he's referring to the other side.
Right.
That from the employer side. Thank
Which
you.
is exactly why we created the campaign that I mentioned earlier that was specifically focusing on the employers and on the many myths that exist amongst the employers. And again, employers, I mean, we say this and it sounds very general, but you know that there is so much diversity in terms of the employment sector and readiness to employ persons with disabilities. So we would really have to unpack that quite a bit to get at some of the specific factors.
And sorry, can I just add to that, which is that I think the point that should be highlighted is that this is a really complex topic, and distilling it down to one or two factors is probably counterproductive to the challenges and the complexity that young people face when we think about it at the population level, as well as when we think about it at the individual level. So I think the point is one that we should all take into account in both our research and our practice, that these are really complex topics and they're affected by multifaceted issues, the personal factors, the psychosocial factors, the contextual issues, the workplace issues, the policy level factors. They all play a role, and they can all create to some degree a level of randomness in the transitional outcomes.
Thank you. So I'm going to take the next question from Slido before we put it back on the floor. To what extent is the curriculum and to what extent the curriculum and exams can, okay, I'm going to just rephrase the question a little bit. So it's, to what extent can the curriculum and therefore exams be switched into a plain language for students who have learning disabilities and are used to having an individual learning plan? So what I'm assuming this question, please forgive me if I'm getting this wrong from the audience, from the delegates here, but to what extent can we assume those the plain language that is used in curriculum and exams can be transferred into when we are transferring into the workforce? That's going to be my big assumption of that question.
Okay. I disagree, Maureen. I'm hearing the question as specific to evaluation in higher education in terms of the curriculum to be adapted in some ways to really facilitate the learning and the success of persons with disabilities, students.
Then I think you should answer that question.
So we do. So students with disabilities are the second largest category of students in post-secondary, right after mental health. We've spent many decades finding ways to provide accommodations to students with learning disabilities. It's an interesting question. So how do we make the curriculum accessible to students with learning disabilities? How do we make exams accessible to students with learning disabilities? It's sort of like asking how can we teach faculty to write in plain language? That's been a challenge for centuries. If you've spent any time in post-secondary and looked at some of the articles and sat in some of the lectures, post-secondary is unique in the sense that faculty, obviously, and I'm one, so please understand when I make fun, I'm making fun of myself. So in case there are faculty members, and I know there are. So Eric, I'm making fun of myself too. You as well, but myself too. But there are, I've invested a lot of time in working with faculty to make courses accessible, and that's exactly what this question is getting at, and Tammy has spoken about this as well, so Tammy, please jump in terms of universal design. There are ways to help our faculty. They are pretty independent in post-secondary. That's a bit of a challenge. So convincing individual faculty members to make their learning environments accessible is quite a challenge, and this obviously includes evaluation like exams. But we have made a lot of progress. So Tammy, I don't know, maybe on universal design.
I was just going to add to that. I agree completely. what I would add to that is when you think about the number of newcomers and folks who speak English or French as their second, third, fourth, fifth language, I think plain language it might be essential for some, but good for all. So I really could not agree more. I think that it's important for us to reduce the barriers wherever possible. But I do agree with you. I also teach at our local university, and yeah, sometimes we get swept away by jargon and all kinds of technical speak, but I think that it is a key factor for sure. And whether you're talking about your presentation style and the way you engage with pedagogy, or the way that you assess folks. So I think they would be key across all of those factors.
Thank you. I think we have another question from the floor. Kathy, did you want to?
I was just going to make some comments from Slido.
Kathy's going to make some comments from Slido, but we'll go to the question from the floor, or the comment from the floor.
He has one question
One comment.
and one comment.
First, have you done any? No, you mentioned about how people with severe disabilities are unemployed.
You mentioned about
People
people with disabilities,
severe
with severe disabilities,
being unemployed.
being underemployed.
Have you done any research
Have you done any research
on attendant care
on attendant care
and helping people with severe disability
and helping people with severe disabilities
being employed?
being employed?
And how would that work
And how would that work?
based on the economy? How would it economic impact?
How would that have an economic impact?
Did you want to say your comment as well at this point, or would you like your question answered first?
Hi. And my comment would be, have you ever thought about having more people with disabilities work from home?
Have you ever thought about having people with severe disabilities work from home?
Perfect. Thank you very much.
I can probably tackle that.
Perfect. Thanks, Arif.
Thank you very much for your questions. So I'll first tackle the work from home comment, because when we've conducted several surveys of people living with different types of disabling health conditions, what we find is that there's several kind of accommodations that are needed that consistently get discussed. The first being extended health benefits. That seems to be, especially among young people, one of the most needed accommodations or benefits that could support their long-term employment. What we also often hear is that flexibility in terms of scheduling is one of the most discussed accommodations that is required, as well as work from home arrangements. So your point is well taken. In terms of the likelihood of someone getting access to them and how that might impact their employment, what we also know is that many young people will start their career in non-standard forms of employment, so part-time work, contract type work, and oftentimes that means that they're not always available, or people aren't always able to access the types of accommodations that they most require. And this creates huge challenges with regards to their ability to sustain employment or move up within their career. So I think you're posing some really interesting questions that we need to study a little bit more. So thank you for that. You also asked about personal assistance. Did I get that correctly? Sorry? Attendance.
care.
Okay, thank you. I personally haven't done research in that area, and I'd be happy to take a look into some of the literature on that and maybe get back to you. But we do ask about one-on-one support in some of our accommodation studies. It hasn't popped out as being some of the most needed accommodation, and we haven't asked about it in terms of its availability within different workplaces, but that might be because of the samples we're studying. And so I think you're raising some really important research questions, and you help highlight some of the gaps that we need to understand a little bit more. So thank you for that.
Good. Excellent. Thank you. We're going to just go to Kathy for a Slido
Yes,
comment.
so we've got a number of comments coming in terms of our question. Some of the responses include partner with public and private employers to create programs to help students find their aptitudes, the jobs associated with those aptitudes, and then develop the skills required for those positions. Better education about what jobs exist in the world, maybe less focus and specialization in early stages of post-secondary education. Another quick one was more summer students, whether in school or not. As panelists stated before, pre-graduation work experiences are key. Even doing very basic jobs like fast food services make a positive difference. And evidence-based approaches such as supported employment.
Thank you. We'll take the other question from the floor now, Jean. Thanks.
I just want to make a quick comment about the attendant thing. I used to be an attendant, and one of my jobs was under the direct funding program, which we have in Ontario, because my employer was a man who needed attendant care. And if you need home care to get you out of bed in the morning, they might be there at 10, they might be there at noon. He had to have the direct funding program so that I could get him out of bed so he could get to work on time.
Thank you. Thank you. I will say that while we were, I had a really good point, and then Jean just pulled me into her comment.
I actually have a point about
Thank you.
the job skills comment, and I think it kind of brings the world of work and education sectors together. And the reason why what I'm going to talk about is the fact that because the labor market is changing so much, a lot of organizations are estimating that about 50% of existing workers will require upskilling and reskilling in order to meet the demands of the changing labor market. So if current employees are requiring training, we also need to adapt the educational training that's provided as well. And the two have to occur in concert, and they have to be adaptable to the continued changes that will occur as new and emerging trends change the way that we work. And so I think it's important to highlight these are really dynamic questions that we need to consider, we need to continue to think about as new changes pop up in our labor market.
Thank you. So I think we've got time for 2 more questions. We have about 5 minutes, so go ahead, Jean. Is there the next person? Hi. Can you introduce yourself as well?
Hi, my name is Melanie. I work at Public Services and Procurement Canada. Specifically, I work in the Accessible Procurement Resource Center. And a lot of the change management, culture change that we're reinforcing is the production of accessible documents. So from a young age, like let's say elementary school or high school or even university, to what point are these practices being put in place? Like let's say you have a TA in university who may require an accessible document sent to them electronically, and as a student you're not aware. Like how often is that being encouraged to have that culture change?
Tammy? Yeah.
So I can speak to some of the things that we're up to. So, for example, as it pertains to academics or to transition, whenever we are putting out requests for proposals for say, for example, in our case, we use My Blueprint as a transition document that students start to use in grade 6. We're really clear from the moment we send out the request for proposals that all of the accommodations, all of the particulars have to be met. And also, in terms of now with assistive technology, we work very closely with the Neil Squire Association, and so we have the assessments done. We ensure that the assistive technology is available, and we ensure that everything we bring in to our classrooms that are available certainly are accessible to all. And that takes a lot of pre-work, but it's well worth it in the end when folks have what they need, not only to be academically successful, but then to be looking to transition from school.
Thank you. Anything to add?
I'll continue from higher education. A lot is done on the accommodation side. A student gets used to those kind of accommodations, also using technology to do that. At Carleton University, we have a dedicated transcription service that will convert all of the course materials into accessible format that works for the student and so on. It's very different on the other side, as in outside of that accommodation world. Where we talk about universal design and so on. To what extent are materials accessible by design in education? That's nowhere close to the state of things on the accommodation side of things. So this is where we focus a lot in terms of helping faculty design their course materials from the start to be accessible.
Excellent, thank you. I remembered what I was going to say. Anybody's interested. And that is that for those of us who were here this morning and we were talking about summer students and work experience as students, and for those of us who were here this morning, we listened to Minister Qualtrough state that she's able to make that change happen. So putting that disability inclusion as a priority for the Canada Summer Jobs is very, very exciting, I think, moving forward, and gives us definitely that leg up. So whoever mentioned that, I just wanted to, that was my 9. Is there another question out there, Jean? And we have one, Diane, at the front as well, so if we're really quick, we can get both in. No pressure.
Hi, I'm Sarah, and I just have a question, wondering why co-op is a chosen and valued route in the post-secondary world, but in the high school world, it's not. It's for a student who can't necessarily succeed and go on to post-secondary. So I'm always advising my clients to choose a co-op opportunity, A, to figure out what they want to do after high school, but also to give them some job experience. And so many of them say, no, I don't want to be seen as a student at that level. I need to get all of my university level courses in. And I'm so curious as to how it's such a respectable choice in post-secondary, but not in high school.
Tammy, do you want to take that?
That's such a great question, and we're working hard to really change that entire ideology because all of the research indicates that this every student requires experiential learning, and with us moving it back to middle school and starting in grade 6, we hope to build the idea that this is an opportunity for everyone, not an opportunity for those who in some way are considered to be less than academic. It is valuable across the board, and as we see more and more post-secondary institutions using it, I'm also hopeful that that will change the mentality.
Thank you. So we have literally 30 seconds, Diane. Thank you.
So I'll make it a statement instead of a question.
Oh, good.
To make it faster. Given that parents are the first influencers in their children's lives, I want to know what tools we have developed or can develop, or should we think about developing to help parents learn when it's good to be supportive and how to be supportive, and then also how do they get out of the way and let their children succeed, but also fail? Because if they don't have both of those experiences, how in God's name are they going to survive in employment?
So that's the philosophical point that we're going to leave with for today. Don't fight it. But I just we're going to break. We're going to have a break now. But first, I wanted just to thank so much the panelists for your thoughtful leading into the questions and into the answers and filling up some of that gap of knowledge that we needed to have filled. And so thank you so much. And Tammy, thank you for your efforts. She was texting me yesterday, I can't get on the plane. So I know that I'm glad that it worked out, and it was wonderful to meet you virtually. And thank you. I think we have a lot to learn from New Brunswick. I often say that New Brunswick is...
Thank you for zooming me in. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, so thank you. And thank you to all of you. We are having a break now for 15 minutes, so please come back in 15 minutes. Thank you so much. Thank you.